Good morning.
Good morning.
So today we are going to continue the series that I had started last week with the introduction to the teachings in the Book of Joy that is written by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu with the assistance of Doug Abrams. And isn't it interesting? Donna came in this morning, we were prepping before the service, and we were talking about some other synchronicities, and then she said, look what your talk title is, Cloudy with a Chance of Joy. We have manifested some clouds. But despite the clouds,
There's joy.
physically, and whatever those clouds are in our lives, we have that deep power to tap into our joy, no matter what the circumstances. And I'm going to go there in just a moment. Today, beginning to look into some of those things that stand in the way of us being connected to the joy of our being. But before I do so, I'm just going to do a quick review for some people who might not have been here. And I know me, it's always good to refresh and to remember. So last week I spoke about the distinction between happiness and joy. And so happiness is connected to those things that bring us external pleasures. They're dependent on an external experience, and we usually engage in some way with them with our five senses. And they are fleeting, and we are meant to enjoy all the divine expression of God all around us, whether it's good food or wine, or a margarita, or a conversation, or nature, or whatever it may be. Do we not? I know one of my favorite things, I don't even have to eat, but when I walk into a trattoria, a really good trattoria, and the first thing that hits me is the wafting smell of fresh baked Italian bread, or it could be French bread, or the sense of garlic and basil and gravy, we call it sauce, and that's meat in it, right? I just walk in and I'm just like, my whole body is excited. It brings back such feelings. My mother and I come from a line of, my father's not so bad, but he doesn't cook so much, but women who are wonderful cooks in my family. So not only when I walk in do I get that experience, the delight of my senses, but it reminds me of home. Anybody ever experienced that? And there's nothing, although we're experiencing some clouds today, but we've had some pretty extraordinary beach days, have we not? And the delight and pleasure we experience by the sun, just the kissing of the sun on our skin, the caressing of the breeze, depending on how brave you are in diving into the ocean and how cold it is, that may give you delight as well. And there is nothing, I love relationships. We are meant to connect. We're supposed to experience the divine as each other. And another one of my favorite pleasures is to get together with people who I love, family and friends. And another thing that we find delight in is our accomplishments. When we get that degree, that new home, that new house. And all of those things are wonderful, and we are meant to experience it all. Because, like I said, everything is an expression of the divine made manifest. And we also have to remember this, that there's something even deeper. Something deeper than those experiences of our external pleasures. Sometimes we can be in one of our favorite trattorias with all of those delectable smells or wafting through the air, and we are surrounded with people in our family. Yet despite all those things, we we may not be feeling happiness, or let alone even able to touch the joy of our being. Maybe we might have gotten news that a loved one, or even ourselves, just had a diagnosis of cancer. My cousin found out this week, she's been ill for several weeks, and we just found out that she was diagnosed with lung cancer. Or perhaps I'm gathered with loved ones, and someone, not that it doesn't happen in my family, makes an off-color remark or says something that you find insulting. And we feel that happiness and that deeper disconnect from our joy leaving us. And so what is joy? Joy is when we are connected to our divine essence from within. It is not dependent upon external circumstances, and it is not something fleeting. It is when we live with our heart wide open to our compassion, when we understand that I have physical experiences, but nothing can ever take away the truth of my being. And I also spoke about when we say God's will, and how Charles Fillmore tells us that divine will for everyone is to experience the joy of their being. And how do you do that is when you are in congruency with your essence, when you are sharing your gifts, when you are connected in your wholeness. How many times when we go through something difficult, and I'm not saying it's easy, do we find it easy to stay connected more to fear, to worry, or the next shoe that may drop, or that there's no hope? And so we are clouded over in our joy. Now I have a very brief video clip that I'm going to share with you this morning. And it is a little raw, and there is some humor, and it has 2 cuss words in it. Are we okay with it? But it speaks to... See, when I'm up here, it's not just about sharing some intellectual nuggets of truth from the books that I have studied with as a minister, but I'm looking for you to get it beyond here. I want you to get it viscerally. I want you to connect with it, not just about what our divinity means, but in our human essence. So I'm going to share this clip with you. Any of you watch or are fans of Sex and the City? Okay, so this is a clip from that.
If you want to see the face of breast cancer, look around you. It's the woman next to you at the dry cleaners, the nurse in pediatrics, the single mother picking her child up from school.
I said inspirational, not perspirational.
She's brave. She's capable. She's you. Oh, fuck it, she's me. And if any of you are having hot flashes like I am, you deserve a fucking medal. Bad enough I lose my hair, now I have my face running down my couture. Oh, the hell with it. That's better.
that the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu say are necessary for us to even attempt to attach or even be connected to the joy of our being. And there are 4 elements that they speak to in the Book of Joy. 4 obstacles that can get in the way of the joy of our being. That is, number 1, where we resist our human suffering. 2, where we do not accept where we are right here and now in our humanness. And 3, when we retreat into the poor me. Now, I am not saying that there are not things for you to take care of on your journey. But when we are cowered over in fear, we implode. And then the 4th is having a mind that is not trained, not developing mental immunity. And in unity, we call that calling forth the power of dominion. The power that we have to look and see about our thoughts and our feelings, and to have that choice. So I want to look at, in this clip, which gets played so beautifully, at first, what you didn't see is that before this clip, Samantha she's undergoing breast cancer treatment, and she was in a store to buy a wig. And she was really having a hard time, and she speaks to her hair being her identity. Now, she's a beautiful woman. She's a model. Her physical identity brings her much success, recognition, and pleasure. And to have her lose her hair was something that was devastating. It was part of her identity. And then we see that she wasn't able to accept where she was. There was a part of her that was still thinking that maybe she did something wrong. Yes, we have to look at our thoughts and our emotions, and we do have to look and see. But she was playing a little bit of guilt and shame and blame. And she was hiding behind the mask. She was wanting to do this benefit to raise money for cancer research. So here she was in all of her uncomfortability, going through it herself, and still wanting to be a source of healing and of light. But yet she started off not accepting her humanness. And so she was giving the speech, and it was coming from her intellect. Like, it's you out there. And then finally, she surrendered. She surrendered in all of her vulnerability. And she took that wig off. How many of us can suffer because we cannot embrace our humanness or where we are? And we hide behind our roles. She hid behind being a model. And how many doctors or healers, if they get a diagnosis, feel that they have to hide, or somewhere they have guilt or shame because their life is about this, and yet here they are suffering. Or how about the counselor, the marriage and family therapist? I was in the hallway, I was going through school, and I was going through my training, my education for marriage and family therapy, and I was also going through a divorce. And someone walked up to me and said, "How could you be going to become a marriage and family therapist and you're getting divorced?" The last time I checked, did it mean that because I was studying that I was now going to be perfect? Or that in my waking up that I didn't realize that this was not something that was healthy or working for me? Or how about ministers? One of the things that I am dedicating to is to be vulnerable. I am spiritual, and I am powerful, and I walk the human journey with you. and allowing myself to be vulnerable, I open that door for you as well. I know several ministers who have committed suicide because of the lonely existence, thinking that because they teach all this that they can't ever go bankrupt or have a divorce or anything like that. And then the other thing that she shows so beautifully, when she takes that wig off and she realized that in her vulnerability came her power, and all those women stood up and took their wigs off. It was an empathetic, connecting, heart to heart, me too. And now, not only are these women opened, right? We have support groups. They work on the empathy, not in wallowing in our pity, but where there are two or more gathered as Jesus spoke, there is the power and the healing in us moving forward. And I have to tell you, it's again another synchronicity. Patricia read the Daily Word. I didn't get to read it yet today. And it spoke about cure and healing in Jesus. There's a distinction between a cure and a healing. A cure is a temporary relief of a physical symptom or an emotional symptom, or it could be, long-term, or from the medication or the treatment that we get. But if we do not do that inner work, if we do not become vulnerable, because there's no back door through it. When we embrace our suffering and we go through it, it brings us to a deeper understanding of us. Guess what? I don't have to hide anymore. I can be authentic. I can call forth a new understanding of God. That is the doorway. And then doing that, did you see her go from the perspiring and realizing that she was connecting with people? She liberated herself. She helped to liberate other women, and she became connected to the joy of her being. She wasn't now concerned about her hair or the profuse sweating. And so that is the third thing that the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu tell us, that we must get out of our isolation. Now, both the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu they both too have walked the human experience. I shared last week that Desmond Tutu has prostate cancer for the second time, and that the Dalai Lama has had his gallbladder removed and cataract surgery, and has almost been killed numerous times, as he sometimes has to hide in Dharamsala, India, after being exiled. And yet these two men, yes, they take the time to go in the wilderness like Jesus spoke to, but then they come out in their humanity and divinity to be a force for good. And so that difference between the cure and healing is seen in Mark 2:22, where Jesus says, "No one puts new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and so are the skins. But one who puts new wine into fresh wineskins will rise in the delectable joy." So, if you know that analogy, I'm not a winemaker, but I found out that when you are making wine, and back in the day, there's a fermentation process. And as the fermentation process occurs, it expands. So if back in Jesus' day, the wineskin, if it became dry and brittle, what would happen as the wine would expand? It would split. It couldn't hold it. But if you take a new wineskin, fresh and pliable, then the expansion happens. And that is what we mean by that healing. When we not only look to whatever the physical things we need to do, but that inner healing occurs when we understand the truth of us, not just here, but with our whole being. And then the fourth tool, which I'm just going to briefly mention, and that will bring us into next week's topic, is about developing mental immunity. And the Dalai Lama speaks of mental immunity to be this. He states, everyone dislikes physical pain and tries to avoid it. We do this not only by curing disease, but also by trying to prevent them and by trying to keep our physical immunity strong. Mental pain is equally disturbing, so we should try to alleviate that as well. The way to do this is to develop mental immunity. Just like a healthy immune system and constitution protects the body against potentially harmful hazardous viruses and bacteria, mental immunity creates a healthy disposition of mind so that it will be less susceptible to negative thoughts and feelings. If your health is strong, when viruses come, they will not make you sick. And if your overall health is weak, even a small virus will be very dangerous for you. Similarly, if your mental health is sound, then when disturbances come, you will have some distress, but quickly recover. If your mental health is not strong, then small disturbances, small problems will cause you much pain and suffering. You will have much fear and worry, sadness and despair and anger and even aggravation. Now, it doesn't mean that when we develop our mental immunity, call forth our power dominion, the power of choice, will, where we look and see which way we will go. It doesn't mean that we will avoid it. But it also then will open us to connect to the joy of our being and to move through it in a different way. Carolyn Mace has this analogy. She said that we're all going to go through the human condition. And she said, you can go through it going through landmines via that way. You can take a jet plane or a slow boat. There's many different ways. And so it doesn't mean that we don't experience them, but how we move through them can determine whether we still are connected to the joy of our being. And so, how do we develop that mental immunity? What will we be looking into? Yes, we are aware of our fourth principle, prayer meditation, having that time in the silence. And then, what they speak of is being aware of your triggers, the stories, and how to call forth dominion. When we are aware of what we are needing, what we are feeling, what we are thinking, and also can call forth our spiritual understanding, we empower ourselves to choose joy. And so this week, I invite you as we journey together to surrender to any dis-ease you are experiencing, whether it's mentally or physically. I invite you to embrace your humanity. Let go of whatever guilt, shame, or blame you are holding on to. I invite you to let go of the masks and the roles that prevent us from being vulnerable. And I encourage you to know at the very depths of your being that you have the power to choose. To choose to be powerfully divine and to be the light of joy no matter what is going on in your life. So I send you that blessing for the week and I say namaste. Namaste.